Throughout the world and across different historical periods, humans have devised cruel and horrifying methods to punish and torture prisoners. From brutal techniques reserved for criminals to ruthless measures for those wrongfully convicted. Follow along to learn more about these terrifying punishments. However, you should consider carefully before watching, as the content may be disturbing and is not suitable for all ages. 10. The Rat Dungeon. In medieval London, everyone feared the punishment of the Rat Dungeon in the Tower of London. This was an underground dungeon beneath the Tower of London, where prisoners were kept in complete darkness. Whenever the river water rose, rats would be forced to leave their shelters, and their only escape was into the dark cells where prisoners were held. Prisoners could only hear the small footsteps of rats, that they would be attacked and bitten by these rats when they couldn't defend themselves. Although they could fend off the rats for a while, they would tire, and eventually when they slept, the rats would continue to bite them. When the prisoners woke up, they would find their bodies covered in bites. This punishment could last for weeks, and by the end of the medieval period, it became a form of execution. Prisoners would be locked there and forgotten. 9. Stretching the body. This was another form of punishment that took place in the Tower of London during medieval times. This torture device looked like a ladder, but it had a turning part, similar to a rolling pin. It's hard to describe in detail, so you might want to see it for yourself. When a prisoner was placed on this torture device, their legs and wrists were tied to a rolling system. Then the system would be turned to stretch each part of the body. The main goal of this torture was to force the prisoner to confess crimes or reveal information. However, the pain and pressure from the device often led prisoners to say what they thought their torturers wanted to hear, rather than the truth. This could lead to further torture if they were discovered to be lying. A tragic case occurred in 1447 when Annie Askew, a 25-year-old woman, was not only tortured on the rack until all her joints were dislocated and she became immobile, but she was later taken out and burned alive. The reason was that she had been teaching the Bible to a group of women and refused to reveal their identities. At that time, anyone following a religion other than the Catholic Church often faced severe consequences. 8. Impalement. This punishment is not as bizarre as you might think, as it was a favored form of twisted torture by Count Vlad, famously known as Dracula. In the 15th century Romania, prisoners were forced to sit on sharp-pointed stakes. These stakes were then gradually raised and pierced through their bodies. This method would cause the victim to die within 3 days due to blood loss and multiple internal injuries. It was rumored that Vlad used this type of torture on more than 20,000 people for entertainment during his meals. 7. Crucifixion. This method dates back to ancient times and was mainly practiced in Western countries. However, there are still reports of some countries applying this brutal form of punishment today. The act of nailing a person to a cross is well known through the event of Jesus Christ being crucified. This form inflicts extreme but slow agony on the victim, who is left to die on the cross. It usually takes about 3 to 4 days to kill a criminal through this method. 6. The Brazen Bull. The brazen bull torture method began with the creation of a bull made of brass or another metal, hollow on the inside, with a door that could be opened on one side. After the victim was placed inside the bull, the door would be locked tight. A fire would be lit under the belly of the bull, gradually heating the metal. As a result, the victim inside would have to endure the increasing heat and be tortured slowly by the melting metal. A practically horrific aspect of this method of torture was the screams of the victim. As the victim screamed inside the bull, the sound would pass through holes in the head of the bull, creating a sound similar to the agonizing roaring of a real bull, making the screams distorted and difficult to hear. This method of torture is believed to have originated in ancient Greece, and it was invented by Perillus of Athens. According to the story, after creating the bull, Perillus presented it to the king Phalaris and proposed using it as a means of torture. However, Phalaris decided to test the bull on Perillus himself first, and then decided not to use this form of torture anymore. Despite controversy over whether this form of torture was actually used, there is no denying that it is one of the symbols of brutality and barbarism in human history. Number 5. Quartering by horses. Quartering by horses is an especially cruel form of torture used in ancient history. This method of torture was performed as follows. Each arm and leg of the victim was tied to a rope attached to a horse. When everything was ready, the 4 horses were driven to run in 4 different directions. The strength and speed of the horses created a tension on the victim's body, leading to the victim being torn apart. This form of torture has been used in many different civilizations and historical periods. It was often used as a form of execution for serious crimes such as treason or espionage. One of the most famous examples of this use of this form of torture is the case of the Damiens, who attempted to assassinate King Louis XV of France in 1757. After being convicted, Damiens was executed by quartering in Paris. Number 4. Elephant trampling. A horrific punishment that no one would wish to endure, being trampled by a huge, imposing elephant. The trained elephants would use their feet to stomp on the body and their trunks to beat the criminal to death. However, the elephant handler would also control the elephant in various ways to punish the criminal. For example, in the Islamic kingdom of Delhi, the death of the prisoner occurred in public, with the elephant's tusks fitted with sharp knives to increase the pain during the execution. Or the elephant could be directed to crush the limbs of the criminal before delivering the final stomp on the skull. This punishment was maintained until the end of the 19th century. This punishment, dating back thousands of years, was commonly used in Southeast Asia and South Asia, particularly in India. 3. Torture by tub. In this form of torture, the prisoner was placed snugly inside a wooden tub, with only their face allowed to protrude. Then the executioner would cover their face with milk and honey. Sounds interesting? Not at all. The milk and honey would attract flies to land on it. Sometimes the prisoner was also fed food that caused diarrhea to enhance the production of feces. All of this was done to create decay and attract insects. The tub would be placed in an area with many insects, even set adrift on a river. The result was that the victim would die slowly and painfully from insect bites and burrowing, along with suffering from infections and psychological effects. 2. Torture by flaying. The prisoner was often tied tightly to a post or a similar structure. The executor would use a knife or other sharp instruments to cut the prisoner's skin and gradually peel it off. This process not only caused tremendous pain, but also led to severe blood loss and infection. As a result, the prisoner often died during the torture or shortly thereafter from blood loss, infection, or shock. In some cases, the executors even used salt to increase the pain for the criminal. In ancient history, many cultures used this form of torture. For example, the Assyrians, one of the oldest empires, were known for their use of skinning as a form of torture. 1. Using rats. The rat punishment is regarded as one of the most gruesome forms of punishment in human history. Let's explore 2 variations of this punishment. Diederik Sonoy, a Dutch leader, implemented this method by placing a rat inside a clay pot, which was then inverted onto a prisoner's body. As the pot was heated from the outside, the rat, in panic, would try to find an escape route. Its only way out was to burrow into the body of the prisoner. Once inside, it would continue to gnaw and tear through anything in its way, desperately seeking an exit. Ultimately, the rat would find its way out of this maze and survive. But the second method was even worse, emerging under the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet from 1976 to 1983, known as the rectoscope. In this version, a tube would be inserted into the prisoner's anus, and a rat was placed inside the tube. Desperate to escape, the rat would move deeper inside, causing tremendous pain to the prisoner, forcing them to confess or answer questions. Reflecting on such brutal punishments in history, we can clearly see the cruelty humans are capable of. These punishments serve as evidence of how societal values have transformed over time. To avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, we must aim for a future that respects and protects the rights of every individual, eliminating all forms of violence and brutality. History has recorded these horrifying punishments, reflecting the cruelty that humans have once executed. These punitive measures are lessons for us in the evolution of social consciousness and morality. To build a better future, we need to remember and learn from the past, continuously striving to protect human rights and eradicate all acts of brutality.